that places like the Nile are not simply historical sites. They are living fields of memory.
Welcome to Destination Awakening, a symposium inviting you to remember how travel, when walked with intention, becomes a catalyst for transformation, spiritual awakening, conscious leadership, and meaningful change in the world. My next guest brings a profound depth to the understanding of sustainable travel as a path of remembrance. Dr. Eva Bajic-Hajdukovic is the founder of Rivers of Remembrance, a body of work that invites people into pilgrimage as a living relational process with land, water, and memory codes. Her work centers around the Nile, not simply as a historical or cultural site, but as a living spiritual corridor that holds layers of human and planetary memory. Through her pilgrimages, participants are guided into an experience where the river, the temple, and the landscape begins to mirror something within themselves. And today we explore the Nile as an initiatory field and what becomes possible when we approach travel as a path of deep listening and remembrance. It is an honor to welcome Dr. Eva Bajic-Hajdukovic to Destination Awakening.
Thank you very much, Julia, for hosting me within your symposium. It is a great honor to be a part of this amazing series that you are broadcasting and producing for Gnostic TV. It's a real privilege to be here with you today. And for a very long time, I have been living inside one question. What does it mean to truly remember? After years of working as an anthropologist and walking ancient lands, I realized something that changed everything for me. That places like the Nile are not simply historical sites. They are living fields of memory, sacred landscapes that once guided humanity through cycles of initiation and remembrance that are now often approached as destinations. And I knew there had to be another way. That realization is what gave birth to the Rivers of Remembrance. Because this connection was never meant to be lost or distant. It is something that every human being can access.
Eva, you bring such a unique perspective as an anthropologist working with sacred landscapes. How do you distinguish between a historical journey along the Nile and what you call a pilgrimage of remembrance? And what actually shifts within the human being and psyche when we move from observing a place to becoming an active participant within an ancient lineage?
That's a wonderful question. This is where anthropology can actually be incredibly helpful in unpacking and unpicking how we approach pilgrimages. Because as anthropologists, we are not just observing and we are not just taking notes and extracting information. We observe by becoming participants in whatever we are studying. And that was the driving force behind the Nile Pilgrimage. I used to, when I was a professor at Syracuse University in London, I used to take my students to London as a city and use it as an open classroom. Because I realized after a number of years of teaching that the best learning is multisensory, is immersive, and it is the one where we can engage not just with auditory senses or visual, like in the classroom, but where we have literally embodied experiences, like hands-on experiences, olfactory experiences, where we can smell something, sense it. And when you add the element of being present, like physical presence in the actual space, that learning is taken to a completely different level. And that was the guiding idea for the Nile Pilgrimage. The inspiration came from my anthropological sort of years of teaching anthropology to students. And I wanted, instead of talking about the Nile, instead of talking about the cultures as we often do as anthropologists, we go into the field and then we come back, we transcribe what our notes, and we give talks, we publish papers, or we publish books, and we talk about what we have observed. And my idea was, why not open up the beautiful banks of the River Nile, the lands, and to those who felt called to reconnecting with our origins, because this is really going towards the Nile, is reconnecting and sewing back our narrative as humanity one step at a time, starting from the source, which, for the sake of the Nile pilgrimage and the practicalities of the trips, I have settled on the idea that the source is in Uganda. And I know this has been contested by geographers, and I know that the actual quote unquote source is further afield in Burundi or Rwanda. But for the practicalities of the Nile pilgrimage and energetically, for me, the source feels very much like that beautiful body of water that Lake Victoria is. It sits right on the equator. And when you stand there in a small boat on that lake, you really felt like you are in the womb of our earth. So for me, being able to bring others onto this trip to experience it for themselves, rather than reading books about it, watching documentaries about it, watching others do it, something shifts inside us when we are physically there in that landscape. We enter a dialogue, not just with the current landscape, but with deep time, with that deep history that runs the layer upon layer of history ingrained in Africa, where first human remains and oldest human remains were found, and where humanity originated from.
That is so powerful. And you mentioned that you guide pilgrims not only through Egypt, but actually also through Uganda, Ethiopia, and all of these other countries on the African continent along the Nile. So why it is so important to experience the Nile as a transcontinental African journey? And what does this reveal about the deeper origins of human wisdom that you just described as deep time?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question. And I think that a lot of us will probably meet Egypt as the first destination or first sort of entry point for majority to will be Egypt when we venture into Africa. And if you look at historically as well, even during the time of Roman conquests in Egypt, they knew that the Nile was somewhere further down south. So Julius Caesar actually sent his troops to explore where the source of the Nile was. But when they stumbled across marshes of Sudan, the soldiers just could not continue. Before that, it was Alexander the Great's descendants who also tried to find the route down to the source of the River Nile, and they too did not manage to get past what is today Sudan. And it is something I feel that whoever encounters that magnificent River Nile in Egypt feels that there is something deeper calling us. And despite the established lore in spiritual circles about the River Nile being almost seen as the human sort of body, the embodiment of our human energy centers, and a lot of people and spiritual workers will associate the region of Aswan with our lower chakras, with root and with sacral, etc., going all the way to the Giza Plateau, where the crown chakra is perceived to be. That did not feel right in my body. When I was walking those lands myself some time ago, it felt that there was something deeper. much deeper than that. And for me, Egypt is the place where we connect with our soul origins and with our star origins, where we transcend our earthly existence. And so I felt, okay, let's see where this river is going to take us when we start following it. And then obviously you go down to Sudan. And then you realize that Sudan is this amazing energetic point where the two Niles, the Blue Nile and the White Nile, converge. They meet in Khartoum. And the source of the Blue Nile is in Ethiopia. The source of the White Nile is in Uganda. And there was for me, it was a no-brainer in a way that these were the two places that I had to go. I wanted to feel what is my body saying and what is going on when I connect with the source of the White Nile and the source of the Blue Nile. What does the energy feel like in the body? How are the two rivers vibrating? What are the differences? If there are any differences. And I also wanted to meet the people, because I believe that the people who live along these banks are the guardians of wisdom, the wisdom keepers, and they are also holding the codes of their ancestors, our ancestors, if you want to put it that way, humanity's ancestors. And I really wanted to meet these communities, because there is still that anthropologist always curious to connect with people to see what can I learn from them. And what I discovered there was really coming face to face with this idea of deep time. One of the things that I wanted to share with you was that on these travels, this is something that you may have seen in museums. It usually is exhibited as a headrest, so you would put it as a pillow almost. And it is found across different ancient cultures. In ancient China, in ancient Egypt, it would have been made of different materials. In China, it would have been made from jade. In Egypt, it would have been made out of gold. And it was, you can find it in many different ancient cultures. And this is not an exhibit from a museum. It is a piece of daily living material culture artifact used by every single traditional community in southern Ethiopia, and I'm sure in parts of Kenya, in parts of Uganda, Sudan, etc. Though I haven't been to Sudan or to Kenya to claim that, but I'm seeing photos, and there is some evidence that I have seen that communities are still using these headrests. They're not only using them as headrests, they use them as tools. When they're out in the fields with their cattle, they will use them to sit on them. And they come with a little hook here to make it easier to carry, because they are not, as I said, meant just for sleeping, but for daily use. And these elements, these sort of examples of material culture, because this is the field that I come from within anthropology, material culture, is what really blew my mind open when I realized that we are talking about living deep history that is still unfolding. For example, when I was last year in Lake Tana in Bahar Dar in Ethiopia, at the source of the Blue Nile, observing the fishermen fishing there, they are using traditionally carved canoes made out of papyrus. And this is the same technique that was used in ancient Egypt. So I had so many questions. My guide there, Ethiopian, was an anthropologist as well. So we had so many conversations about how that knowledge traveled along the banks of the Nile. Because if you look at the distances between the Blue Nile in Ethiopia and ancient Egypt, they're really huge distances. They're big sort of stretches of land. And yet you find all these glimpses of shared knowledge, of shared techniques passed along the banks of the River Nile. The third, for me, key for sort of understanding how deep time works in situ were languages. There are around 50 different traditional communities living in southern Ethiopia currently. And they speak with different languages. They don't always, they can't understand one another because one group of tribes speak with Omotic languages, meaning they're coming from around the river Omo, which is one of the major rivers in southern Ethiopia. The other groups are speaking with Cushitic languages, which means that they have descended from the former kingdom of Kush, which is in today's Sudan. And the third group of tribes speaks with Nilotic languages, meaning they have descended from way up in the north, from the River Nile. So all of these, sort of encountering these people and speaking with them and talking to the Dasanich people about a visit to the Hammer people, because they were curious. Small children in particular were curious to see. I would ask them if I could have a photo with them, and then they would start flicking through my phone and they would say, "Oh, who is this?" They would point at a picture, and I would tell them, "Well, these are your Dasanich neighbors." And they live literally just maybe 20 minutes away from one another. But they can't understand each other because they have descended from very different ancestors, and they speak very different languages. Some of them coming from way up in the sort of northern regions of Africa. Some came from today's Sudan. Some came from southern Ethiopia. And they're all merging and melting around this area. And again, it is a living, breathing culture, and with so much to learn from these people in terms of agriculture, in terms of beekeeping, in terms of navigating climate change, because they are feeling it. They're on the forefront of what is going on. They're so much more exposed to climate change. And I found it absolutely fascinating being in that region and in contact with these wonderful people.
So you speak a lot about, the people as carriers of wisdom and stewards of wisdom, but also your work places a very strong emphasis on water as a carrier of memory and consciousness. From your perspective, how does the Nile hold both that ancestral memory, but also maybe some collective trauma? And how does connecting with the Earth's waters begin to shift something within our own inner landscape in terms of healing?
Water is, as we are discovering more and more people doing research about water more recently, is an archive and transmitter of consciousness. And we are made mostly out of water as well. So we feel it when we are in proximity. What I'm finding that when we are in proximity of these ancient waters and ancient rivers, they almost sort of strike a dialogue with some sort of ancient remembering stored deep within our cells, deep within our own DNA, as if something gets activated within us. Our own remembering of where we came from, who we are, where what our true essence is. And this brings up, obviously, a lot of wisdom, a lot of ancestral and collective layers. But with it, that often comes a lot of trauma stored in the water, often stored in our own bodies. And if you don't mind me sharing a little bit of my personal journey with the Nile, I have never experienced, and just to sort of say this in brackets, I am a healer, but I've never experienced profoundly such healing as I did with the White Nile in Uganda. When I got submerged in the White Nile during the rafting trip, which, by the way, it looks very amazing, it looks really exhilarating, but it is the actual sort of moment of getting inside that water, of being held by that river, of allowing the river to literally sort of take you in its embrace, to enfold you and to allow you to resurface. that was such an exercise in trust. It was an exercise in letting go, an exercise in reconnecting with oneself. And also because you're there with a group, with others, it is also an exercise in trusting fellow humans, that you are going to be there for somebody as much as they are going to be there for you. And with everything that is unfolding in the world around us, I think that I really needed that sort of injection and reassurance, from the universe that yes, humanity is still ticking along and we are genuinely looking after one another despite what is unfolding on the global scale and all the sort of crumbling that we are witnessing. So I felt that it was really the journey above the surface of the water as much as it was the journey underneath the surface, the one that unfolds within us, within our body and within our soul. And everything came together or comes together in the Nile Pilgrimage. Our body connects with our soul and it connects with the landscape. And this is that moment of alignment where you just feel, oh, I'm 100% on and alive. And really you feel it that you are part of oneness. There is no dichotomy. There is no sense of duality, no sense of, fragmentation, but only a sense of connection and feeling one with all that is. And for me, this is the most profound healing that I have ever experienced. And I have to say, it is something that I can only wish, to be able to go back again and to take others to experience that for themselves.
I have goosebumps and I'm so calm. I can visually see the white Nile that brings all the healing codes. Mm. And I feel water is also such a deep feminine element. And I know that for you, the divine feminine plays a central role. And you mentioned you are a healer as well. So in these both worlds that you bring together, especially through the archetypes or deities like Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, so the Egyptian Neter. And why are these archetypal forces so relevant in the world today? And what happens when we as individuals begin to consciously embody these frequencies within us?
I feel that as many of us who are treading healing waters are experiencing and feeling, that we are really going through a process of rebalancing between the divine masculine and divine feminine. Whereas divine feminine has been suppressed for throughout the sort of last, I don't know how many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And that we are finally accepting that we are not just one, that, our beings are, all of us carry both divine masculine and divine feminine. And that rebalancing is reclaiming almost. We are being all invited to reclaim all parts of who we are. Our divine masculine alongside our divine feminine in its highest and purest forms, because there are also lower segments of both, of divine feminine and divine masculine. And in that, I'm finding that Egyptian pantheon and divine feminine as sort of embodied in the archetypes of goddesses Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, as you mentioned already, really brings and weaves that together really beautifully. The sort of the holding everything in that embrace of transmuting, being able to transmute the lower frequencies and lower energies into highest possible frequencies. This is what Goddess Isis has taught us and is teaching us. Finding joy with Goddess Hathor, learning how to really reconnect and find the beauty after losing parts of ourselves, after grieving, and I feel that after, the 20th century and the past 2000 years, humanity almost feels like coming through a long period of grieving. Like we are grieving for a lost part of ourselves And it feels like we are all searching for a missing part of ourselves. And it's also underpinned by the archetype of goddess Sekhmet, who is that sort of ancient sacred rage, embodying that rage at the state of the world, and what we are witnessing is going on, and saying no more. We want something different. We deserve a different world, and we want to create a different experience and different reality for ourselves. If we have one go, at least in this lifetime, then we want to make it count. And this, for me, is what the sort of these archetypal goddess energies are reminding us, to really look and harness that sacred rage and to work with it as a driving fuel, as a force for the change, force for the better, and not getting swept under the sort of lower frequencies and energies and sinking into darkness and losing ourselves in depression and despair and saying everything is falling apart, hence there is nothing we can do. But reclaiming that in the highest possible form and anchoring the frequencies of peace, love, and joy with the help of divine feminine. And I find that the work that you do, Julia, with Mary Magdalene is absolutely essential and amazingly helpful in these times, because she's someone who walked this earth, which we can't always say about goddesses and gods as archetypes, but to have someone who has experienced life on earth and to bring those frequencies, and somebody who was most probably initiate into the Egyptian sort of goddesses and divine feminine, it's really crucial for us as well to bring those into daily lives and to weave their wisdom and teachings into what we do and who we are. It's not just what we are doing, but how we are breathing, what thoughts we are entertaining, what feelings we are creating inside ourselves. And I find it that divine feminine cannot figure and feature on its own. It has to be in balance with divine masculine, but it both deserve to have their equal places in our individual and collective experiences.
That's so beautifully said, and I resonate deeply with what you said about, you know, the anchoring of the codes, and just like by being these pillars of frequency. And I feel this is a very, very distinct frequency that is going to be infused from now on into everything that we do, like even in the businesses that we run. And I feel for you, and like specifically with the pilgrimage that you bring forward, this deep feminine wisdom is interwoven so deeply with it. So I want to speak a little bit about sacred reciprocity and connection, which I also feel is a deep part of how the feminine might balance things other than the masculine in the past. So your pilgrimage includes a very strong give back model supporting local communities all across the Nile regions that you also talked about. And how does this principle of sacred reciprocity change the experience of the pilgrim that is coming along? And why do you think that this is so essential also in the evolution of conscious travel looking forward?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and it is directly related to my background or academic baggage as anthropologists. We have a long shadow, right? So we had to come to terms, like with extractive and quite damaging practices of previous generations of anthropologists who were essentially sent to colonies to study the subjugated people and to learn how to govern them. And while doing so, anthropologists were not essentially and not necessarily starting with bad intentions, but then their knowledge was extracted and it was used for those purposes. And so while doing anthropology, we were all made aware of how not to do that work, that we have to be respectful of the communities that we work with, what we publish, that this can have a long-term impact, and that you cannot just unhook yourself from the community, go away and take the knowledge, take your findings, and just pretend like they're an exhibit in the museum. We are working with living, breathing communities, their dynamics, and it is always opening up the question of reciprocity and how you approach a place, how you approach a community. And in my past fieldwork, I created some friendships that are lasting for more than 20 years. And I feel that new generations of anthropologists that are coming out of the pipeline in the past probably 50 years have all become so much more conscious about giving back, about building bridges, about doing something for the community. And my heart just melted away when exploring the South Omo Valley in Ethiopia. I came across a museum set up by a German anthropologist, Professor Dr. Ivo Strecker, who spent about half a century studying the Hamar people of the southern Omo Valley in Ethiopia. He set up a research center, and his subsequent students, PhD researchers, continued the good work that he did. And it was not just about documenting about the communities, but they were working, and in particular, Professor Strecker was working in partnership with those communities to lobby the government against projects that seemed not to be in the best interests for those communities. So he became like a loudspeaker for the community that he lived with and raised his child together with, and he's part of that community, or he was part of that community. I don't know whether he's still around. He's in his mid-80s or thereabouts now, but I found it just so beautiful. And this is the idea that I want to take with me on the Nile Pilgrimage. The realization that we cannot just go somewhere, although yes, we are paying the local guides and we are paying for our travels through these lands, but there is so much that we can give back. And it doesn't always have to be, it doesn't all come down to financial exchanges. The giving back can have many different shapes and forms. And sometimes it is not all orchestrated. Like, I was not prepared, I knew that I wanted to take something with me to Ethiopia, for example. So in partnership with my local guide, the anthropologist, I decided to take stationery. But then in the light of the global warming, or not warming as much as changing, I became aware that the local communities probably needed clothes more, especially small children, more than stationery at this moment in time. So it was something that really stayed with me. I have to say that there was an encounter which brought both my guide and myself to tears, because we're both parents, and there was a young boy who was following us from one sort of house to another around the village. And I just wanted, and it was pouring down with rain. And I was thinking, if I take my jacket off and put it on him, but he was really small, he would have been about 2 years old, my jacket would have been really big on him. And, I doubt that he would be, allowed to keep it. Probably there would have been an older person, around him who would have needed it more, And it just sort of prompted me, what can I do? And then we arranged with a guide to send a suitcase or whatever, kind of amount of clothes to Ethiopia, with another acquaintance who was traveling later on. And it is something that, that's when I clocked, okay, I need to deepen my awareness and my understanding about the people's needs and ask them what it is that you need. How can I help you? What can I do for you? Not just what can you do for me, by showing me your beautiful land, by opening your doors, because this is what happens in Uganda, in Ethiopia. People open the doors of their homes. They're so welcoming, they're trusting. And I felt that it has to be two-way, like any relationship. Otherwise, it becomes an extractive experience, which is what we often see in a lot of quote unquote spiritual travel around Egypt, that it does exactly that. it's sort of kind of under the pretense of spiritual travel. It basically turns into a very extractive experiences where people go to places to, quote unquote, collect codes from temples to get initiated into working with this goddess or that god, into Egyptian magic or whatever else they're being promised and guided to do. But there isn't an awareness of the country that they are visiting, that it is a living, breathing country and people with their needs. That perhaps not everything that we do is going to be perceived in those temples, in whatever way we think it should be perceived. And it is just an invitation, opening up the conversation about how we travel in the 21st century, what the intention of that travel and those encounters is. Are we traveling just to improve our individual selves? Or are we traveling with the idea of perhaps doing something else, creating bridges between cultures, maybe, engaging in dialogue, understanding how people live? Because there is a really important aspect of the Nile Pilgrimage that I didn't mention so far, but it was a question that kept coming up before I went on this trip. How can you, as a solo white female traveler, even dare to go to places like sub-Saharan Africa? And I want to break that stereotype down and that myth, because I feel that because we are not engaging or haven't been engaging enough during traveling around Africa and probably around other parts of the world with local communities, we do not really know much about these places. And there are all these assumptions coming from, I don't know when exactly in history, that it is unsafe, that something is going to happen, that somehow as a solo traveler, female solo traveler, we are more endangered than elsewhere. To be perfectly honest, I'm probably feeling more endangered, walking through some parts of London than I was, like traveling throughout savannah in Africa, because, it's just sort of, it's important to sort of start breaking down these barriers and to normalize these conversations, to help people understand that humans are humans wherever you go. Most, I would say more than 90% of people that we meet anywhere will be just ordinary, normal, lovely people. There is a very small percentage anywhere we go that won't be like that. How we navigate and how we sort of find our way around that smaller percentage, I mean, that can happen anywhere. But I find it that these encounters with people are so important in breaking down the barriers and going beyond what we have been conditioned through the media, through whatever, kind of official channels have been feeding us about particular parts of the world as being unsafe to travel, to visit, to get to know. And I would say, go and experience that for yourselves and see whether it's true or not.
Wow, that sounds like a true initiation into heart opening, like the alchemy of pilgrimage in its essence.
Yeah.
So take us a little bit into the experience. What is the specific alchemy that does take place when people enter a landscape like the Nile on a pilgrimage in this very intentional, reciprocal, sacred way? And what do they carry back home with them and into their lives?
One of the biggest, I would say, takeaways, other than these encounters with the people, which for me are probably the sort of the most exciting thing. I couldn't stop talking, whoever I saw after coming back, like I was just like a broken jukebox, like just kept going on and on and on, I want to tell you about, the beautiful encounter on the banks of the White Nile and, the group of ladies washing the clothes with accompanied by their children. And next to them, there was a young man washing his bicycle. And it really melted my heart. It made me laugh because it reminded me of my neighbors. We have exactly the same scenario going on in my street. Come any Saturday or Sunday, they may not be washing their bicycles, they may be washing their cars or their motorbikes, but the concept is very much the same. Like there are women looking after the house, looking after the washing, and young men looking after their vehicles. It's like, and you would say, oh, what common things do we have with, with people in, this sort of southern part of Uganda? We have so much more in common than we often think. So for me, that's one of the most beautiful things, but also the shifts and the healing that I mentioned earlier that unfolds when we come into alignment. The alignment between the spirit, the body, and the landscape, and the change, the sort of that happens from within us. That change, it's the alchemy really that sort of comes into existence and into motion when our inner waters encounter the water from and the codes in the waters around us, in the river and the land, and that activation that happens and the alignment, and where you feel you are one with the landscape, you are one with yourself, fully centered, fully aligned. You know exactly who you are, why you are planted on this earth at this time. That is very interesting. And more than that, you feel that you are one with humanity's history. You really feel that connection with deep time. And when you stand in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, for example, I felt such a big shift inside. There was a moment of, oh, I know this place. I've been here before. Although I don't have in this lifetime any relatives there, I felt like I could almost feel and hear the call of a grandmother from so many generations ago. And it made me, it brought me to tears just standing there and being in that landscape. So it really reconnects you back with the origins, not just of yourself, but with humanity. And it kind of makes the sort of the ordinary life when you go back home a bit more, I would say, manageable, because I feel there is so much noise around us where we live in the Western world. And we are constantly being told and shown, oh, this is what is going on. It's almost like this kind of the idea of the end of the world as we know it. And I keep going back inside. That trip really taught me about the necessity of coming back daily to the breath, to reconnecting with the inner flow inside of us, with the inner river. And I literally visualize the River Nile starting from the root chakra and flowing all the way through all the energy centers through my body. And I do it daily. It has become part of my daily practice. I've been meditating before, but after the Nile Pilgrimage, that energy that flows through the body, some call it Kundalini. For me, that's the Nile River embodied. And so the Nile Pilgrimage is something where I feel that I started it even before I officially embarked on it, when I got on the plane to Addis Ababa last year. It is something that is still living inside of my body. And I feel that it will continue to live for the rest of the life. So I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways, the remembrance and anchoring that memory inside our bodies.
Powerful. So it's almost like once you go, you become the pillar of remembrance yourself and the code carrier.
Yes.
So for all those who feel that pull, as you described it, that remembrance call to the Nile, even if it's not fully understood by the mind yet, what would you want them to know?
The Nile is not something you need to understand before you go. You enter a relationship with it. So it's what happens when you slow down, when you listen, And when you allow the landscape to meet you, this is when remembrance begins to unfold. Not as something that we learn, but as something, as I just described, that you discover inside yourself. And that remembrance does not stay at the river. It's not something that you experience only when you visit the River Nile. It becomes one with you. It starts to move with you into how you live, how you relate to others, to the world around us, how you walk in the world. Because ultimately, this work is not only about the journey. The journey is just the beginning. It really is about the remembrance as a way of being, where we are once again in relationship with the earth, with each other, and with ourselves.
That is powerful. Thank you, Eva. So for everybody who deeply resonated with your words and with what you said, where can people find you? And I also know that you have prepared a beautiful gift for the listeners. So please tell us about that.
Yes, I have a website called theriversofremembrance.com, where you can find out more about the work that I do. It's a combination of anthropology, of healing, of sacred journeys, and I offer during the year various workshops and educational content. And I also host weekly meditation for peace, which was guided by Goddess Isis after my visit to Egypt to start offering that. And it is directly related to the Nile Pilgrimage, I have to say, because in that space for peace, I do not guide necessarily those who are coming onto the meditation where to go. I guide everybody to gather in our hearts and to cultivate peace inside our hearts. And then I leave it up to every single individual, because there are people joining us from different parts of the world, to go wherever they're guided and wherever they feel their presence is needed to cultivate and anchor the frequency of peace. So we become like pillars of peace frequencies dotted around the world, creating that field of coherence. And I cannot ignore the elephant in the room when talking about the Nile Pilgrimage and not referring to the suffering that is ongoing in Sudan, and to say that one of the biggest motivations for me at the moment for this meditation, for the Nile Pilgrimage, is to open up the heart chakra of the River Nile, which I feel is in Khartoum, and to send as much peace and as much healing as we can hold to that part of the world, because they are experiencing so much at the moment and have been experiencing a lot of suffering in the past years and decades. And I feel we all need to put in the effort and remember that they're not some people out there. They are all our people. It's our planet and our people. Everybody is. And we need to look after everyone. So for me, that meditation is really key for everything else that is happening. And that is free to everyone. It lasts for 15 to 20 minutes, so it is not a big commitment, and it takes place every Sunday on Zoom. And beyond this, whoever is sort of hearing this conversation between you and I and is intrigued and you want to connect with me, I am offering a free healing sort of a session for people who are watching this, and there is always going to be a 20% discount on any Nile pilgrimages taking place wherever they are and whenever you decide to join us on the Nile pilgrimage.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Eva, for bringing this depth of remembrance into our conversation. What it really is, that reminder of sacred travel not simply being about where we go, but about how we enter this living memory field and this living field of wisdom. And the Nile in this way is not just a destination, but it really becomes that living pathway that guides us into remembrance, into the rhythm, and also into a deeper intelligence that exists beyond what we can see with our eyes. And perhaps this is the invitation of travel in our time, to move beyond observation, to move beyond consumption and extraction, and to really begin once again to walk the earth in remembrance. Thank you, Eva, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Julia, for having me. And thank you to everybody who is watching or listening to this show.